for those of you, Tanya, who actually did turn up promptly and on time. There has been a bit of a delay, but we're going to start now. And this session, Natalie has asked me to chair this session, but I don't intend to be very interventionist about it. I'm just going to tell you what goodies you can expect. We have 4 talks scheduled. The first is by Vera da Silva and me. What can anthropological linguistic research tell us about the cultural evolution of concepts of time? If anything, we should add. And then we have Natalie, who is going to talk about element thinking in early cosmologies. And then we have Michael Rappenbluch. Hi Michael, who is going to talk about the cosmic tree of life and worlds. Symbols, myths and rituals explain an archaic concept of cosmologies in cultures. And then we have Harold, who was, yes you are there, who is going to talk about proto-geometry between words and numbers. So I think it is going to be very interesting. It is, of course, incredibly difficult to project notions about as bad. I mean, you know, it's difficult enough to think about, you know, what about early language. It's just as difficult, or even more so, to have thoughts about other symbolic and representational systems, and of course cosmologies and worldviews. Anyway, with no further ado, I am presenting this on behalf of Vera, who can't be here, and myself. What can anthropological linguistics tell us about the cultural evolution of concepts of time? Now, all cosmologies implicitly or explicitly describe or draw upon a conceptualization of time. Much of the fascination exercised on the modern mind by ancient myth and legend comes from the way their concepts of time differ from our own. Think, for example, of the Vedic notion of the succession of worlds in cycles of creation and destruction, or the Viking Edda, foretelling Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, or the immensely complex Mayan calendar system, also cyclic, which inspired a real fear in some people that the year 2012 would bring cosmic catastrophe, as well as a high-earning and highly forgettable Hollywood disaster movie. In our own time, the nature of time, even its very existence, remains a hotly contested topic, and one that preoccupies the popular as well as the scientific imagination. Read, if you haven't already, Carlo Rovelli's absorbing and informative The Order of Time. What was it that permitted the translation of the Mayan notion of time as a system of embedded and interlocking cycles into a prediction of end of days in 2012? The answer is that classical Mayan time was calendric, embedded in a number system rivaling and even surpassing, in some respects, classical Western mathematics. Once the Mayan calendar had been correlated or calibrated in the early 20th century, the so-called GMT correlation, with the Gregorian calendar, it was possible to identify any given day in the Mayan calendar, well, the long run, with one in our, whatever that is, calendar. The main not sold number system used by the classical Maya was vigesimal, base 20. That used by the Babylonians was base 60, and our clock time units, seconds, minutes and hours, still preserve this Babylonian system. Time intervals such as hours, days, months and years that can be counted in numerically defined calendric or clock systems can be called metric time. And calendars and clocks are instruments or cognitive technologies for measuring metric time. Now this has introduced what I call, or we call, the metric bias in theories of the evolution of time concepts. Because we're so accustomed to conceptualizing time in terms of calendric systems, and there is now a substantial body of knowledge of calendric systems of ancient civilizations, and this tends to skew our notions of the cultural evolution of time towards the search for precursors of metric time systems, and for cognitive artifacts that integrate time and number. In their nature, such artifacts are representational, and the representations that they embody integrate time and number in spatial arrays. This introduces a further bias, namely an assumption that the spatialization of time is a human cognitive universal, manifested in a mental timeline, which is either rectilinear or, if you like, cyclical. A circle is still fine. Metric time is then seen as an evolutionary elaboration of this pre-existing mental timeline. Examples: Chinese calendric representations, an Inca quipu, the Pachaquipu, which is claimed to be calendric in its nature. I can't go into this in detail. And old stuff, the Ishango bone, quite famous, and the more recently discovered but not quite so famous Libombo bone, both from southern Africa, Central and Southern Africa, which are artifacts with notches, which can of course be counted. And it has been claimed that these are kind of proto-calendric systems. It's also been claimed that they are that they actually were used for counting and predicting female menstrual cycles. But these claims are controversial, of course. Right, metaphorical spatialization of time also relies on this notion that spatialization of time is universal. But it's true, it's very common in languages around the world, the notion that time is space. We say things like, summer is coming, we're approaching the new year. And the future is metaphorically located in our languages and cultures, in front of the experiencer, the past behind. We have Rafael Núñez here, who has shown that there are, in the Aymara Andean culture, this is reversed, if you like. Again, I mean, Rafael can say a lot about this. And well, never mind that stuff. Okay, but is this universal? Now, Vera and I, together with other people who I will acknowledge at the end, have researched time concepts in Amazonian languages for 10 or more years. And we tried to find out what is the role of culture and language in how people understand and represent time. And what kind of systems of temporal concepts do indigenous Brazilian communities employ? And do their languages show evidence of a mental timeline? And what kind of metaphors do they use for talking about temporal relations? We started off with a language called Amondawa, a small indigenous group, which had been first contacted in 1986. Vera and our colleague, Bani Sampaio, had been working there previously for several years. It's a Tupian language. I have to go quickly. This is like early first contact. This is the chief or cacique. These are Amondawa artifacts. These are recent festivals. Traditional house. That's how it looks now. That's the school. Okay, they have an indigenous school. This is interesting because of the tattoos that that this woman has. This is traditional, face art, if you like. And something important: the Amondawa number system, like that of many Amazonian languages, is very restricted. Four lexicalized numbers with two basic lexemes, okay, which are repeated. We've done, I'm not going to report that today, but we've looked at 23 different Amazonian languages and looked at the typology of the numeral systems in these languages. They're all small number systems. The other three languages languages that I'm going to talk about are also small number languages. Right. I talked earlier about metric time systems. Let's think about now what we call event-based time intervals, which are those whose boundaries are constituted by the event itself. In this sense, there's no cognitive differentiation between the time interval and the duration of the activity that defines it and from which it derives its name. So we can, examples. Let's take a holiday in the spring. Okay, the spring is an event-based time interval. Okay, of course we do measure it now calendrically, but primarily it's an event-based time interval. Or I can say, let's talk about that at the coffee break. Coffee break is an event-based time interval. Okay. Here is Amondawa, their seasonal schema. 2 seasons, basically dry season, which is designated by the word quara for sun, and the rainy season, which is designated by the word amana for rain. And they have sub-intervals as well. These are the day time intervals. I'm sorry I'm going so fast, but I don't have a choice. You can just read this, okay? These are the time intervals for the day. They don't have a calendar. The interval systems of season and day have sub-intervals. There is no subordinate year. There's no word, year, okay? There's no name for week. There's no name for lunar month. There are 4 names for lunar phases, and there is 1 application of the 4-item numeral system to time intervals, enumerating moons, probably lunar phases. Lunar phases do recur as an important concept, but usually not enumerated in these cultures. Anyway, there's no calendric system, there are no metric time concepts, and the Amondawa do not use spatial metaphors for time. That's what we found. Well, they use exclusively event-based time intervals. The words and expressions for these time intervals and for temporal relations are not derived from spatial relational expressions. They don't use spatial metaphors for time. It's an event-based time culture. But is it unique, Amondawa, or is it strange, just an outlier? Or is there really something that we missed in investigate? Of course there could have been, single cases do not make for a theory, really. So we went on, basically Vera, to research 3 other indigenous Brazilian communities and languages. Unicuin, which is a Panoan language, and 2 other Tupian languages, Aweti and Kamaiora, both of them in the Xingu Indigenous National Park. Unicuin is spoken in Acre State, which is up in the northwest on the border of Peru. Okay, so they're geographically quite separated, as well as being different language families. That's something interesting to talk about. Okay, these are our collaborators. This is Joaquin Kashinawa, and this is Wadi Sabino Kamaiora, okay? And they are both doctoral postdocs in linguistics from the University of Brasilia, and they are our colleagues, okay? And there's Vera surrounded by some people. I think these are Aweti people, okay? Don't have time. Okay. Methods, structured elicitation interviews, elicitation bar tasks based on visual non-linguistic stimuli, and ethnographic description. This is like how you do the tasks. Results, that's what's important. Okay. Time in Hunikuin, Kamaiora, and Aweti cultures is organized in terms of event-based intervals in the following domains. Life stages, which was also, I didn't have time to say that, but it's also the case for Amondawa, okay? Very interesting, but another story. Parts of the day and night and seasons, okay? So we looked at all these domains. These intervals are indexically marked by specific events, for example, positions of the stars, environmental happenings, the level of the water in the rivers, the breezes, and and the sounds of the crickets at different times of year, and other animals, you know, the particular monkey calls, yeah, that happen at different times. And body changes in puberty and older age and so on. Metaphors for time in all these cultures are not based on spatial concepts. Amondawa is not unique, okay? So these are the kind of metaphors, when you ask them, right? So we had to ask in Portuguese, right? Using without consultants. So you can ask about the methodology and so on. They don't have words for past and future. These languages do have ways of referring to past tense, but these are not, you know, timeless languages. There are deictic time particles. There is aspect, and aspect kind of gets fused in some cases with evidentiality and so on. So these are not timeless languages, but they don't have words for past and future. But if you ask, and we do need to, I know we need to research this much more carefully, using even more methods and so on. But these are the kind of things that people would say. Where is the past? Well, no, it's not there, and it's not there either. The past is in my heart, okay? Where is the future? The future is in my mind, okay? It's kind of, in my mind's eye, right? It's in my imagination. So, actually, the metaphors that people use for temporality are metaphors to do with embodied psychological processes, okay? Is anybody actually doing timing? I mean...
You started at 24 and it's 39. So
that makes 15 minutes, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I would like to leave some time for discussion. So I'm going to rush a bit. But here are Hunikuini life stages, Awachi life stages. Here are some nice examples, all right? Right, Beruna in Hunikuini. It means keen eye, right? If you get to a certain, when you become an adolescent, a young adolescent, you're supposed to be a hunter, right? Keen eye, that's the life stage. When you're old, right? Very wrinkled, very wrinkled, and old woman in Awachi. This is a Panoan language. This is a Tupian language, okay? Shrunk, very wrinkled, okay? This is a good one, right? This is for a girl in Hunikuini. When she's reached puberty and she's ready for sexual relations, hot fire, right? So these are the life stage concepts. Parts of the day. It's not only the sun, it is the sun, but it's also like the way that the sun indexes certain activities when you come back from the fields, for example, because you do your work in the fields. These are not hunter-gatherers, right? These are agricultural societies, traditional agricultural societies. Come back from the field. But also, I really don't have... There is a paper about all of this, so I will upload it. Seasonal interviews. Strong rain. Rain is finished. This is just really the same stuff that we found in Amondawa, but in these other languages as well. Cold breeze is beginning, okay? This is, the rainy season, and it's beginning, and so on. The moon, very important. It's an indexical marker, like for parts of the day, late at night. Also, the moon shape indexes the female menstrual cycle. Every woman has their own moon shape, okay? When she gets her first period, a girl looks at the moon, okay, and decides which shape it is. And from then on, that's when you expect your menstrual period. And if it doesn't come, well, you're pregnant, right? Or you could be. The The moon, of course, is a being, and it can you can ask it to protect you. You can ask it to take away bad things like your own anger, other people's anger, gossip about you. All right. Stars. Okay. These are constellations. Actually, these are our T constellations. All right. You won't recognize them because, of course, they're not the same as even the Southern Hemisphere constellations that we have. Here's something interesting. You saw the kipu earlier, which is a string. In Kamayora and Awachi, people tie knots in a string before they go on fishing expeditions, and that means it's finished, right?
No, it's 10 minutes.
Really?
You saw it then.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, if you like, at the end, I can show. I can go back to the examples because some of them are very cool. And so this is very interesting. Okay. Before going on a fishing expedition, the men tie knots in a string, which is a kind of estimate of how long they're going to take. All right. And then at the end of every day, they untie one of the knots. Okay. But it's not actually a tally or count of the number of days spent. It's a kind of way of indicating that something has been completed towards the completion of the entire thing. And in principle, if the people at home also tie strings, knots in the string, they can also, figure out when somebody's likely to come home. So here is a Kamayora guy with a knotted string. So this is a cognitive artifact. And one of the things we really need to find out is the extent to which the small number system is actually coordinated with the knotted string. Because we actually don't know this at the moment. But they also use other tallies. However, so the Hunikoin traditionally used to make a mark on a piece of wood signifying the completion of a day or the activity making up a day. But we're not sure whether this is really, what part of tradition is this? Because actually these people were employed as slave laborers by the rubber planters in the late 19th and early 20th century. So that might date from that period, okay? Location of events in time. Awati and Kamayora, past, which are very closely related languages, or fairly closely, past is located in their eyes, and the past in this sense is linked with memories, and the memories can be seen in the mind's eye. The future is in front of the eyes, okay? The next study we're going to do is one which systematically looks at speech, co-speech gesture, looking at, but informally, yes, we have observed that people seem to gesture towards the face, not like in front there, but towards the face. For Hunikoin, the past is located in the heart, and the future is located in the head. So the future is in the mind, okay? The head is the mind. This is also related to vision, because the future, again, is what you see in the mind's eye, or imagination, okay? Well, this shouldn't surprise anybody who knows anything about cognitive, conceptual metaphor theory. Think of the way in which we say, I see, when we mean I understand, okay? Nothing surprising. The thing that is surprising for many people is that they don't, that they don't use metric time. They don't have clocks and calendars. There are entire cultures which can work without that, okay? Right, now, some more tricky stuff. And that is, there is many people who research time concepts, including Raphael, use this distinction between deictic time, which is often considered to be the temporal schematization which underlies tense, and sequential time, okay, which is to do with earlier and later and before and after. Okay, and of course there is always in all languages some mapping between sequential time and deictic time. Here are some schematizations using the notion of moving time. And here is something that we kind of take for granted in our culture. Just look at the top one for the time being, okay? You know, think of, we're in 2018. Think back to 2008 and forward, right? Metaphorically to 2028, right? This timeline is, this is like a timeline of sequential time, before and after, or earlier and later. But of course, you can map the past and the future, D-time, onto this. And we tend to think of time as like moving from the past to the future along this line, right? And by the way, what's the earliest clear expression of this? Isaac Newton in the 17th century in his discussion of what is absolute time. Okay, this has become embedded as a kind of folk notion of temporal motion. Okay, leave the second one. So in tense you have adverbial deictics such as tomorrow and yesterday, which all these three languages have, by the way. And of course temporal landmarks such as next weekend. And S-time is to do with earlier and later. But actually, many tense constructions and also ordinal terms such as the day before yesterday can actually blend D-time and S-time. Right, here is the Hunikuin time schema as far as we can represent it. I am going to stop fairly early so that we have some time. This is Hunikuin. You know, we've racked our brains about this, right? So they have terms for before and after, or earlier and later, right? There seems to be no timeline. Again, we need to do more research on this, and we're going to. But it seems that when they map before and after onto future and past, actually, Shana, which means, wait a minute, Shana means before, okay, is then, you know, there is a morphological addition to, there is a, you know, there is a morphological inflection. Shana becomes Shani, okay, and that means future. Whereas, okay, so before is future, and after is past, all right, which is completely different. In fact, it's a reversal of the way that we think about this, right? The time flowing from the past to the future, sequential time. But actually, we actually think our own representation of this, which is the way that we try to make sense of it, is actually misleading. Because really, it's about completion. So this leads into a whole other set of questions about the primacy of aspectuality. And we actually think that, that this event-based time system is indicative, this is very speculative, indicative of what we might call an event-based culture in which completion and anticipation are the really key things about temporal concepts, okay? Also underlying their metaphorizations. So, Shia and Ishani, after and before, are not located on a timeline. We think this is misleading, but it's the only way I can represent it. Events, as it were, are passing from before now, in my mind, to now, and from now to after now in my heart, okay? And we really insisted with our, you know, linguist informant, native speaker linguist informant, we really said, is this really true? Is this right? Yes, I mean, this was repeatedly said. Okay, conclusion, here we are. Event-based time interval names in these languages are not derived by metaphoric extension from spatial concepts. Spatial language is used indexically, like when you talk about a concept for midday as being the sun above my head, all right? This is spatial language, but it's not a spatial relational metaphor. It's a spatial indexicalization of an event-based time interval. It's not a metaphor for it. In these languages, we think there is no mental timeline. Incidentally, other people are now coming out and have been for a while saying that mental timelines, contrary to the claims of some cognitive scientists, are not universal. There is no mental timeline, only the actual pulse of movement of sun, moon, and stars. And this research sheds new light on what may be universal, on what may be language and culture specific in the conceptualization of time. Event-based time intervals are embedded in cultural practices, in the natural environment, and the social organization of everyday life. Event-based time cultures, not metric time cultures, are, we hypothesize, the key to understanding what is really universal in human concepts of time, and therefore the cultural evolutionary roots of temporal concepts. So thank you very much.